Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning. Welcome to Encounter. I'm Jeff Kellam, your host today. I'm the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. Today is the meeting of the first annual convention of Encounter hosts. All four Encounter hosts are here today, and we have no topic, so thank you for joining us. Actually, we do have a topic, and the topic is Encounter. This program has been on for almost 75 years. And maybe not quite, but we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about media ministry in general. You know, when KDKA went on the air in the early 1920s in Pittsburgh, almost immediately there was a church service broadcast. And then I remember in Richmond, Virginia, when I was there, one church I served as the youth pastor, it was that long ago, had its own radio station, which had begun in 1924. The church elder had driven up to Washington, D.C. to the Federal Radio Commission to get a license. He called ahead so he could go on a Saturday because they wanted to broadcast something on Sunday. So that first radio station in Richmond, Virginia, and the second station in the whole state of Virginia was started by a church. So church and broadcasting have gone together for a long time, and the Encounter program has a long history as well. Perhaps one of the longest running programs of its kind in the country. So my guests today are the Reverend Rachel Helgeson, who is the pastor at the Northminster Presbyterian Church. Not Northminster, but Northminster. And when I type it, I always hit the O, it's Northmonster. And then Joe Sellepack, Dr. Joe Sellepack, is the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches. And the Reverend Mark Kimpland is the pastor. Is it the senior pastor? Is it the...
That's the official title.
There you go. Yes. Senior pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church.
Yes.
Joe, let's start with you, because when you're
Why
finished,
not?
We might just go home.
Good place to start.
You've done a little bit of research looking into the history of this program. And here we are beginning a new church year on the first Sunday of Advent. Tell me about what you've learned about the history of this program.
So at the 75th anniversary of the Council of Churches a few years ago, so we're already 77, 78 years old now. I had some of the original hosts come on to the show. So let me backtrack and say that before we were called Encounter, we were actually called another name, and I can never remember the other name.
It's probably Dialogue.
It was like Dialogue. Yeah. It was some weird, and the guy would go, the original Counter, the person who was, I think his name was Jim Jones, if you can believe it. And I said to him, you have a name that kind of invokes a different kind of thing. And he's an Episcopalian minister. And he said, yeah, I understood that was a problem after like the 1980s, when all that stuff happened. Yes. He said, but before that, I've been a minister for a long time. And anyway, but we were talking about how we got the name Encounter. And he said, I came up with the name because I did not like the previous name. It had too much of overly religious religious kind of connotation, and I wanted this to be a place where the community encountered the church, or the church encountered the community, and for us to be able to come together with a show that kind of meant something for Broome County in general. And he said that was 45 years ago.
Oh my!
And so we know that the show has previous history to even that, so we go way back.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, perhaps 75 years wouldn't be beyond the scope of what we've been doing. WMBF used to be WBNG and WMBF, you know, they used to be
Used to be one thing.
One thing. And so I know that the radio program predates the television program. So we've been doing this for quite a few years. And really, I mean, the whole aspect of encountering the community and having it be a part of a community conversation with religion and with, you know, public policy has been something that we've done for a long time. And what's the other interesting thing was that there's a woman named Jennifer Butler. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to even know her, but she has been doing media ministry and going back for a long period of time too. And I had a conversation with her about our Encounter show, and she said, you know, these shows like this were very prevalent in the 1920s and 1930s, and then at some point, a lot of the mainline denominations gave up on media ministry, and evangelicals took it over. And we went with, she was lamenting the fact that when that happened, you know, the only ones that you see as media ministers are like the Pat Robertsons or the Jerry Falwells, or, you know, or anyone that has like has that kind of a thing, has that kind of a presence and that kind of a following. She said, but used to be, you know, you'd have Bishop Sheen, or you'd have any number of other, Norman Vincent Peale, or you know, any other, all kinds of ministers were part of the media ministry, and so there was a wider understanding of religion and its public presence. We've tried to honor that here in Encounter. We've tried to keep keep that kind of idea alive, where we don't have it all be, you know, from one ideological perspective, but that we try to incorporate as many voices as possible in the dialogue. And I think that's been a very strong part of what the show has been about, in my estimation of it.
The old Federal Council of Churches, I think, had a policy of not buying time on radio and TV, thinking that the television and radio airwaves belong to the public.
Right.
Therefore, they would not buy time. The evangelical churches didn't mind buying a half hour or an hour or more. And so that's what I think helped change things. But there were still stations that were, under their licenses, required to do some sort of public service broadcasting, and so the religious programs fit there. And then as they began to sell more time, the free time got pushed earlier and earlier and earlier in the morning. Mark, how long have you been an Encounter host?
6.5 years. And it was quite an interesting beginning. Just a word about the history of this, because I remember 50 years ago, in my home church in North Syracuse, Andrews Memorial United Methodist Church, down in the basement of that church, there was a radio ministry there, and Bishop Forrest Stith was the one that would broadcast every week, and we were like rock stars in that church for having this media presence. And it was, and I remember that as an 8-year-old, 10-year-old, that was pretty cutting edge back in the day and such things. But 6.5 years ago, Dave Alexander, a former host of the show, invited my wife and I to come on this Encounter show. Now, we had just moved in. We still didn't unpack our boxes or anything. And I humbly accepted. I said, that'd be great to just kind of share my story. I thought it was funny. My wife didn't. I thought it was a radio show. And so I told my wife, we're going to hit a radio show here. And so she dressed up as if she was going to be on a radio show. And then we came on set. Surprise. So that show still may be archived, I don't know, but my wife hasn't seen it since. So, but it was a wonderful introduction for me, and kind of the impetus as to where I wanted to take some of my shows, to kind of welcome new pastors and hear their story, their theology, their hopes and focus and vision for the community.
Yeah, I think for those who've come in late, there are some folks who only watch the television version at 5:30 on Sunday morning on WBNG. And there are other folks who listen only to the radio and didn't realize we were on TV. So we do say now and then our viewers and listeners, because we are on the Town Square media stations as well as on WBNG TV. I almost said WNBF TV.
You know, when it becomes really problematic is when you have someone like Jim Dutko, for instance, is a guest on your show, and Jim, whenever he comes on the show, he always brings icons because in Orthodox theology, everything is so visual. So he brings in an icon, he describes the icon, and you're sitting there, you know, trying to tell people what the icon looks like or describing the icon to the radio audience, and it proves really limiting, you know, because you wish everybody could, you know, like, and maybe this would be something for the future of Encounter, would be for us to have like a website where we could direct people back and say, all right, here's where the icon that we were talking about, and this is what it looks like, and so that people can get further. Well, that's something worth noting, that most Encounter programs do wind up on the internet. Right.
That if you go to the Broome County Council of Churches website, which is
www.broomecouncil.net.
broomecouncil.net, then you'll find the programs there. You just click on the Encounter tab, and many of them are lodged there, so you can actually see the program. Rachel, you've done like, what, 3 shows?
Yeah, I've posted 3, so so not 6.5 years.
So what was it like when we called you and said, we're looking for another co-host?
That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I was a little surprised, truthfully, not in a bad way, just in I had never thought about doing something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, so I was just sort of like you. I was interviewed by Jeff when I first got
It's a
here.
very dangerous thing to be interviewed
right?
by.
And Jeff was really excited because he's like, because in the Presbyterian system, we don't get as many like rotating in and out. So he was like, I get to do what Mark does all the time. And I remember that, and I didn't know what to expect either. I'm glad that I got notes about, okay, this is a television show, and it is also on the radio, and here's some things that'll happen. And that was really helpful because I had never experienced this particular venue before. But then fast forward to the summer, getting the phone call from you, I was like, oh, I just never really thought about that. And it also sort of made me wonder and think about, well, how do we use media? So thinking, you talked about the past, but how are we using it now, and how are we going to use it in the future? Like most of my youth and young adults, everything's online. Everything's like, they listen to podcasts, they're watching YouTube videos, they're pulling up TikTok, they have their Facebook and their Snapchat and their Instagram. And so I think it's something that we need to pay attention to, is how are we using media, and are we using it for a positive thing? Are we opening the conversation, or are we just sort of laying low? And I think it's interesting too to hear that the history of first media there's been a push and pull on that too within denominational understanding. So to me, it was like, well, this just seems like an opportunity to explore that and to think about, how is God working within the Southern Tier? How can we as hosts be considering about how to allow a lot of different voices, to have an Orthodox priest come and talk about icons, to talk about Methodism, but also then to come and be like, well, what does media look like? And like last week I hosted someone who is a veteran, and I found out later that it was a really meaningful conversation for him, and it opened up a broader conversation for other people who hadn't really thought about their faith and what that looks like intertwined with other parts of their life. So those are the conversations that I think this space can create and garner. And I think that people are really looking for authenticity, to hear about new pastors and why did you come into ministry? What is that about? You know, why would you do this?
That takes about 27 minutes.
Right? Yeah, it
Yes,
really does.
right,
Because
right.
why? There's so many
Yeah.
other things you could do. Why
Sure.
this? Or why did you decide that you're going to go and help with the Broome County Council of Churches and bring that together? And
Nobody's ever asked me that question.
Well,
just kidding.
every day. But I mean, those are things,
Yeah.
and I know that we are always thinking about that. I know, Jeff, that's been sort of your lifelong career, has been thinking about media, and you were ordained to it, right?
Yeah,
Am I remembering that
yeah.
correctly?
Yep, yep. Yeah, I was ordained in 1969 as a minister for electronic media, and so I did radio and TV on behalf of the church, and it wasn't always, often it was evangelism. You know, I was doing a rock show, but I was making spiritual connections to secular rock music. But I also hosted programs in Richmond on public TV. We did a 2-hour prime time live call-in show about Teilhard de Chardin. So, I mean, you couldn't do that today, but the TV station said, that sounds interesting, and we got funding for it. And we had, I don't know, 90 calls. And then we had a panel to talk about the work of this Jesuit paleontologist, science and religion coming together. It was exciting. What a great night. And we did another 2-hour special on what is it like to be old. So we took all the programs about aging in Central Virginia and did this program. And, you know, as I look back on this stuff, it was what we used to call cutting edge. But here's this program we're on now. By the way, our guests are Rachel Helgeson, Joe Sellepack, Mark Kimpland, and what's his name?
Jeff Kellam.
Jeffrey Stanton. So we are, we're talking about the encounter ministry. I was interested in that idea of encounter, where the church encounters the area, because, you know, I'm kind of interested in the arts too. And so I remember a program where I had Naima Cragen come on,
Right.
or I took my camera to the No Theater and interviewed Tim Gleason. And these are not religious programs necessarily, but it's the church encountering the arts.
Yes.
And a Warfield was on from the Arts Council. It was those are the programs I'm kind of interested in, is where the church meets culture and meets community, to say we're interested in these topics as well as our
Well,
own.
and we need to make clear that Chris Miller, who is our cameraman, he's the person that's always
The
behind.
director.
Yeah, we call him the director. He doesn't like being
He was
called the
shirked from
director.
that
He was
title.
he doesn't have anything to do with it. But to be fair, I mean, we send him material and he puts it together and he puts it out on like the stuff that you had taped at various places, or Mark's had taped at various places, and puts it together. That requires a little work, and this is really a volunteer thing that the station goes through in order to put it all together for us. And so we owe them a debt of gratitude. I mean, they do a lot of work for us that we get pro bono. And so I just give a shout out to WBNG, give a shout out to Chris Miller for the work that they've been able to do for us.
Yeah. And the same to the Town Square media stations. Roger Neal has been terrific with helping us get that program placed and on each weekend. So yeah, it's a community effort, and I think we owe a great deal to the media companies that have been a part of the Encounter program through the years, but also to the Broome County Council of Churches, which has so many wonderful ministries, tentacles out into the community. In so many different ways. I've said before, this is a tremendous council of churches. I've been in 2 or 3 areas where, I can't say enough about it, and obviously I can't say.
Well, and what's interesting. So I get the question, why did you become the executive director of the Council of Churches?
Right.
I had been involved in a lot of ministry in various contexts. I had been in both a homeless shelter. I like to tell people that my kids were born in a homeless shelter because I was a resident director, and I was also a pastor of a very rural church, and then a pastor of a suburban church. So one of the things that I've always gravitated toward within my ministry is the idea that there's really nothing that is beyond the scope of understanding theologically. Mm-hmm. One of my formative people was a person named Stan Hallett, who was a Presbyterian minister in Chicago, who was involved with urban planning. He was involved with housing issues. He had developed a sustainable house where you had a greenhouse on the top that would pump, and this was all back in the 80s. It would pump hot air into your house and warm the house up, and then there was and then you would have vegetables. It was a completely sustainable house that he was working on in the 80s. And I asked him, so is this ministry? And he says, of course it's ministry. and what people understand as ministry is always, is always so myopic. Yes. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do in a lot of ways is kind of expand our definition of what ministry is, so that we, theologically we understand that, that the person who delivers mail is part of God's network. And in some ways, we within Encounter are trying to help expand that definition so that people can understand. Well, there is, even though we may be talking about a really small event that's going on inside of some place that's raising some money for somebody, that there's a reason for them being here and for them to be a part of the greater network of God's love and care and grace. And I think that it's that what it's meant to me personally to be the director of the Council of Churches is that it really helps that network come alive. It makes me understand the broader dynamics of faith and how we all function. Yeah. Even, I've had an agnostic on the show, or I've had atheists.
I was just going to say, I know that there's been rabbis on this conversation, and there's been imams, and so was the other thing. Even though all of us come from a Christian perspective, that the Broome County Council of Churches isn't just Christian churches, because I know when we went on the walk there, we saw there were Muslim folks and there were Jewish folks, and we try to come together when we can, which is tricky because our schedules are all different, especially with sacred space. But this encounter also allows for space to think about how do we encounter faith,
Yeah, because one of the things that I'm just starting to appreciate more doing this for 5-6 years and such is that the encounter program that people will see or hear actually is a journey that we all take out in the community to listen and to hear. And I love the shows that I've been honored to host that I know nothing about the topic. Right. I can barely spell it. To be able to just sit and engage and encounter that because of the work that's been done before that, to keep eyes and ears open as to what people are passionate about in their ministries in life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned money just a couple of minutes ago, and I hope folks get the fact that we don't ask for money.
We don't.
We don't have a toll-free number. My name is there on the screen, but we don't have a toll-free number.
Oh, we don't?
You can send contributions. We're all volunteers. The stations are donating the time. And so we are, this is a public service, public affairs kind of program. Yeah. And we don't have to build an empire or buy a Learjet.
No.
But it would be nice if I had one.
Well, and really, I mean, when we have somebody who has an event that's going on, it's because we think that it's important that the community knows about the event. Yeah. So, when they're doing like a bake sale to honor somebody who's going through cancer treatments, and we have those people on there, and we'll say, well, tell us about the life of that person or something. Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that I've really liked about this show is that you have 27 minutes, and oftentimes in this day and age, everything is so short.
Sound bites.
Sound bites.
Yeah.
So when, for instance, you had a couple of ministers who were coming out against what they called gay marriage when the whole thing was going on, I had them come on and we talked for 27 minutes about about what was going on with them and how they were actually defining that. And you found out that it was more complicated than what the media was saying. These people are for it, these people are against it. And really, I mean, when I was talking with these two ministers, they were saying, you know, we want civil relationships, but we just don't want to define marriage in that way. Mm-hmm. And we have to be able to differentiate this in some way. And I was like, you know, because we got 27 minutes to talk about it. It wasn't the USA Today version, you know. It was like much more in depth.
And I think that's helpful because you know, I have a list of potential people to interview, and I think it came out of a Binghamton social action kind of group of some sort. But still, finding the guests each week can be a challenge. Yes, but there are other times where I have a long list, and I'm thinking, my gosh, where do I start? Next week, we're going to be talking about the Mr. Rogers movie. And because that's
so excited talking about media ministry. Mr. Rogers is a really good flow-in Presbyterian pastor.
Comes together there. Yeah. Well, I didn't know where we were going, frankly, in the last 26 minutes, but we have about a minute left for us to close. So thank you all for electing me the chair for this meeting.
I thought you voluntold yourself to do it.
I'm not sure. Mark Kimpland from the Endwell United Methodist Church, Joe Sellepack, the Executive Director of the Broome County Council of Churches, Rachel Helgeson from the Northminster Presbyterian Church in Endwell, and I'm Jeff Kellam from the Parish Associate, a retired guy at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. We've been talking about the Encounter program, and thank you, because you, the audience, certainly make this meaningful for us, and the feedback that we get from you is very helpful as well. So go to the Broome County Council of Churches website, look for previous programs, and then join us again next week when we talk about the Mr. Rogers movie. I'm Jeff Kellam, thanking you for being with us, and hoping that in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and with yourself.